Tokyo, Monday, March the 20th, 1995. The sun hasn't risen yet. A man slaps his alarm clock and sits up in bed. He's got a meeting downtown. A mother zips her daughter's backpack. She'll ride the Marunouchi line to school. A train operator checks his watch. 5:41 a.m., right on schedule. Everything is in motion. The city is waking up. Lights flicker on. Coffee brews. Shoes hit the pavement. The day begins like any other, until it doesn't. Elsewhere, 5 men step into the morning light. Each carries something small, a plastic bag, an umbrella, a map in their heads. One of them stops at a convenience store, picks up 2 newspapers. Another one grabs gloves, tape, sandals, and a knife. Casual, invisible. They split up, 5 separate paths, all converging underground. 5 stations, 5 trains, 5 destinations that will never look the same again. On board, the trains are full. Suits, briefcases, tired eyes staring at nothing. One of the men kneels slightly, sets his bag down on the floor. It's wrapped in newspaper. Inside, nearly a liter of liquid. He pulls the umbrella. A sharpened tip jabs through the plastic. Once, twice, again. Clear fluid begins to seep. He steps off. Doors close. The train keeps moving. The bag stays behind. At first, no one notices. Then, someone coughs. A woman gasps. Her chest locks up. A man grabs a rail. His hands are trembling. Another passenger collapses. The air grows heavy. Some think it's the flu. Some think it's panic. One train station worker finds the wet bag and tosses it, bare-handed, into a trash bin. Nobody understands what's happening. Not yet. But across Tokyo, on 3 subway lines, the same symptoms are appearing. Coughing, vomiting, burning eyes, and silence, because no one knows what to say. Within minutes, calls start flooding in. Dispatchers are overwhelmed. Trains are still running. In one carriage, 5 passengers lie unconscious. In another, someone hits the emergency button, but the train's still in the tunnel. They have to wait until the next station. By then, it's too late. 13 people will never make it home. More than 6,000 will be injured, some permanently, and the men who did it will disappear into the crowd. No demands, no manifesto, no warning. This wasn't a lone act of terror. It was a military-grade nerve agent, deployed with precision, and it was only possible because of what had been built in the shadows. A movement, a cult, an empire, all led by one man, a man who promised peace and delivered poison. This is the story of the Tokyo subway Sarin attack and the silent war that began long before the first train left the station. Before the coughing, before the chaos, before the plastic bags seeped nerve gas into the arteries of Tokyo, there was a whisper that moved through bookstores and yoga studios, through meditation halls and late-night radio shows. It offered transformation, peace. It wore white robes, and it smiled. But underneath, it was sharpening something. Japan in the late 1980s looked pristine on the surface, a nation of order, of neon and progress. But beneath that, something was cracking. The economy was overheated. Office workers slept at their desks. Suicides rose quietly. Young people, educated, brilliant, felt spiritually hollow. That's when he appeared, not as a god, not yet, just a man, short, bearded, legally blind. He sold herbs and ran a tiny yoga school out of his apartment. His name was Chizuo Matsumoto. He didn't look like a prophet, but he had a voice that didn't waver, and in a world filled with noise, certainty sounded divine. He claimed to have meditated in the mountains, claimed a deity appeared before him and named him the god of light. He said he could levitate, said he could leave his body, said salvation could be achieved, not through faith, but through science. It sounded insane, but for some, it was exactly what they needed to hear. He changed his name, Shoko Asahara. He founded a movement, Aum Shinrikyo, the supreme truth. At first, it looked like hundreds of other fringe religious groups. Meditation, clean eating, slogans about peace. But Asahara didn't want to heal the world. He wanted to rule it. He told followers the world was doomed. A final war was coming, one that would destroy everything, except them. They would survive, because they were chosen. And he was not just a man, he was Shiva, Christ, Buddha reborn, the avatar of destruction, the key to salvation. He didn't ask for belief, he asked for surrender, and he knew exactly where to find it. He didn't recruit the elderly or the gullible. He went after the best minds in Japan, elite students, scientists, engineers. He spoke at top universities, offered scholarships, promised purpose, and they came. Brilliant men and women with degrees in virology, chemistry, physics, people who had everything except meaning. And Asahara gave them meaning, a white robe, a title, a mission. The outside world told them to sit in cubicles. He told them they could change history. In a culture built on conformity, he gave them chaos and called it enlightenment. Wasn't just a cult, it was a blueprint. It had ministries, laboratories, chain businesses, real estate, political candidates, and an ideology that turned mass death into moral duty. But to outsiders, it still looked harmless. A spiritual group in funny outfits. They didn't see what was coming. Nobody did, because Aum had stopped pretending to be peaceful and started preparing for war. He started as a salesman, a boy born into poverty, raised by tatami mat weavers, legally blind in one eye, rejected from medical school, mocked for his ambition. But failure didn't stop Chizuo Matsumoto. It reshaped him. He didn't want money, he wanted worship. And if the world wouldn't give it to him willingly, he'd build a new world where they had no choice. He studied religion like a weapon, picked pieces from Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, anything with prophecy. He blended Eastern mysticism with Western apocalypticism. He even quoted Nostradamus. Then he rebranded himself. Not as a man, not as a monk, but as a messiah. Shoko Asahara was born, a self-declared god in a crowded apartment filled with incense, tapes, and loyal eyes. He published books, held press conferences, claimed he could read minds and float above the earth. Photos were staged, videos were edited, but the illusion worked because belief doesn't need evidence, just timing. And Asahara's timing was perfect. Japan was at a spiritual crossroads, and he offered a map. But this wasn't enlightenment, it was elevation by submission. To rise through the ranks of Aum, you didn't need to be kind, you needed to be obedient. New recruits started as Sama Minarai observers, just 1 foot inside the door. To truly join the inner world, you had to become a Shinjin. That meant cutting off your family, quitting your job, giving up your name. They handed over their identities like old coats. Then came the rituals, high doses of LSD, locked rooms with no clocks, no sleep, no food, no exit. They were told it was purification, a way to kill the ego, but it was something else entirely. They were being broken, systematically. They were forbidden to love, forbidden to speak freely, forbidden even to ejaculate. Asahara claimed celibacy was sacred, but not for him. He slept with female followers whenever he wanted, called it divine fusion. No one questioned it, because questioning meant doubt, and doubt meant punishment. The deeper you went, the less you could leave. Members were beaten, deprived of air and food, forced to kneel and rise 100,000 times. In rooms with no mirrors, you forget your own face. In temples with one god, you forget your own will. This wasn't faith, it was transformation by trauma, and Asahara was its architect. To his followers, he was no longer just a leader. He was reality, the source of their pain, and the only path to escape it. The world outside was now evil, polluted with karma, destined to burn. Only inside Aum could they be clean. Only through Asahara could they be saved. He had become what he always wanted, not a man with followers, a god with soldiers, and his holy war was just beginning. In Aum Shinrikyo, belief wasn't enough. You had to earn your place. You had to suffer for it. Asahara didn't just want loyalty. He wanted control, and pain was how he got it. They called it training. A disciple is locked in a room. Lights off, no food, just recordings of Asahara's voice on loop for 3 days, sometimes more. Another is submerged in freezing water, not once, not twice, repeatedly, until their body stops shaking because it's too weak to shake. These weren't punishments. Not officially, they were purification, Bad karma, Asahara said, needed to be flushed out through heat, cold, silence, drugs, pain. The logic was circular. If it hurts, you must be impure. If you resist, you're still impure. If you break, you're being cleansed. Followers believed it because the pain came wrapped in scripture and because they saw others endure it without protest. There was a ritual called denunciation. A member stands in the center. Others surround them. They scream at them, shame them, break them down to rebuild them cleaner. Sometimes the accused would faint. Sometimes they would vomit. No one left the circle until they confessed, even if they hadn't done anything. Inside Aum's walls, suffering was holy, doubt was disease, and questioning Asahara unthinkable. The deeper you went, the more control he had. He introduced initiation devices, machines followers strapped to their heads. They sent electrical pulses into the brain, meant to simulate Asahara's brainwaves. One recruit said it felt like his skull was being crushed, but he thanked Asahara afterward, because pain was a gift, a shortcut to enlightenment. There was the perfect salvation system, an isolation chamber, LSD, starvation, no light, no time. You come out reborn, or broken beyond repair. But no one said that part out loud. Even medical professionals inside Aum surrendered to this logic. A doctor questioned Asahara's authority once. He disappeared. No body, no record, just a name scratched from the ledger. Others learned quickly. Silence is safer than science, and in silence, Aum grew darker. Asahara told his followers they could carry the karma of others. That meant healing the world, even if it meant killing parts of it. What started as spiritual cleansing became something else. Suffering was no longer just a means of devotion. It was becoming policy. And the more pain they could endure, the more pain they believed they had the right to inflict. What began as meditation was evolving into murder. The line between pain and punishment was always blurry inside Aum, but in 1988, it disappeared completely. It started with a man named Shuji Taguchi. He wasn't a dissident, he wasn't a spy. He was just afraid. His friend had died during a ritual, hung upside down for too long, dropped in freezing water, a purification gone wrong. The leaders panicked. They burned the body, scattered the ashes in a lake. No one was supposed to know, but Taguchi knew, and he was thinking about leaving. Worse, he was thinking about telling someone. To Asahara, that was betrayal, not just disobedience, spiritual treason. He called a meeting. 5 men were chosen, doctors, disciples, loyal. They surrounded Taguchi in a small room, padded walls, no cameras. They told him to lie down. He did. Then one of them reached for the cord, and slowly they strangled him. No rage, no yelling, just silence and obedience. Taguchi didn't fight. By the time he realized what was happening, it was already too late. His last breath wasn't a scream. It was a question, unanswered. They burned his body, again, and dumped his remains. Asahara told them they had done the right thing. Not murder, salvation. He said Taguchi's soul had bad karma, and by ending his life, they'd spared him suffering in the next. It wasn't a sin. It was mercy. And just like that, the first kill became a ritual. The others didn't question it, because Asahara had redefined reality. Death wasn't an end. It was a tool, one they could now use whenever faith demanded it. The cult was no longer just a doctrine. It was now a machine, capable of execution. And Asahara, he was no longer just a guru. He was now a man who could decide who lived and who didn't. By the end of the 1980s, Aum was no longer just a religious movement. It had uniforms. It had departments. It had borders. It looked less like a spiritual group and more like a nation preparing for war. They called it the Shambhala Plan, a prophecy of global collapse, a vision of rebirth, and at the center, Aum Shinrikyo. The plan wasn't metaphorical. It had blueprints. Asahara believed the world would end in fire, nuclear war, mass extinction. The outside world was infected, and only Aum would survive. So they began preparing, not for rescue, but for inheritance. Land was purchased near Mount Fuji. A new headquarters was built, part monastery, part fortress. They called it Seishin 1. It had dorms, temples, storage rooms, and hidden laboratories. This was where belief became infrastructure. Aum's leaders, now called ministers, oversaw everything. There was a ministry of health, a ministry of science, a ministry of intelligence, and even a ministry of construction, each one run like a government agency. Each one staffed by former engineers, doctors, and scientists. Most had degrees from Japan's top universities. They weren't radicals, they were professionals, and they were building a civilization in waiting. They called their compounds lotus villages, self-sustaining, isolated, obedient. Inside, followers lived under constant surveillance. No outsiders, no TV, no dissent. The villages weren't homes. They were prototypes, models for what the world would look like after the war. No democracy, no freedom, only Aum, and only Asahara. To fund this vision, they needed money, lots of it. So they built a financial empire. A former office worker named Isako Ishii was put in charge. She streamlined the cult's assets into real estate, fitness centers, and electronics. Undercut Japan's PC market by building and selling cheap computers. They ran yoga studios, bookstores, restaurants. They even exported tea from Sri Lanka and ran a sheep farm in Australia. Everything fed back into the cult. And when that wasn't enough, Asahara sold himself, literally. His bathwater, $1,000 per bottle. His blood, $10,000 a vial. Followers lined up to drink it. They abducted a man whose sister had fled the cult. She was wealthy. They wanted her back. He refused to talk. They held him down, drugged him, kept him in a semi-conscious loop. Eventually, he died of an overdose. This time, someone saw. A bystander noted the van's license plate, reported it. Police traced it directly to an Aum member, and that wasn't all. Soil samples had recently revealed sarin-related compounds near one of Aum's properties. Too many coincidences, too much smoke. Authorities began preparing for a full-scale raid on Aum's compounds. Inside the cult, panic spread. They had stockpiles, documents, victims buried on site. A raid would mean collapse. But Asahara wasn't planning to run. He was planning a distraction. If they struck first, the police would hesitate. If they could create chaos, they might buy time. So he ordered one final test, and this time, it had to succeed. There would be no more exotic toxins, no mythical superweapons, no dreams of invisible beams. They would use sarin, director, efficient, real, no gas vans, no fans, no remote triggers, just plastic bags, just sharpened umbrellas. The simplest delivery method they had ever used, and the most devastating. March 20th, 1995, Tokyo. It was a Monday, rush hour, the busiest public transit system in the world. 5 men, 5 cars, 5 plastic bags, each carrying sarin. The plan was simple, crude, lethal. Each operative was assigned a subway line. Each would board at a different station. Each would puncture their sarin bag with a sharpened umbrella and leave. No manifesto, no demands, no warning. At 3 a.m., they rehearsed, using water. By dawn, they were ready. Their targets, Chiyoda Line, Hibiya Line, Marunouchi Line 3 arteries running directly into the heart of Tokyo's government district, Kasumi Gaseki. The timing wasn't random. This was strategic. As workers, officials, and schoolchildren boarded trains, Aum began its war. Ikuo Hayashi boarded the Chiyoda Line at Saginomiya Station. He rode 3 stops. Near Shinochanomizu, he dropped the bag, stabbed it with his umbrella, then exited. The liquid seeped across the floor. A woman inhaled. Her lungs locked. She collapsed. By the time the train reached Kasumi Gaseki, the carriage had become a sealed chamber of poison. Toru Toyoda, a physicist, boarded the Hibiya Line at Nakameguro. He rode 1 stop, punctured the bag, stepped off at Ebisu. Passengers began coughing, then choking, then dropping. The train, still running, pulled into Kasumi Gaseki. Its front carriage was empty, except for the gas. Masato Yokoyama boarded the Marunouchi Line, heading toward Ikebukuro. He stabbed the bag in the 5th carriage, but only 1 packet punctured. He wiped the umbrella clean in a station bathroom and walked away. The gas leaked slowly. too slowly to be noticed immediately. That train completed its route, then made another full journey, still carrying Sarin, before anyone realized what was happening. 1 hour and 40 minutes of invisible death. Yasuo Hayashi, the most devoted, carried 2 Sarin packages. He boarded the Hibiya line from the opposite end. He released both. The odor was sharp, metallic. A man kicked one of the bags onto the platform at Kodenmacho Station. Gas poured out. No alarms, no sirens, just burning eyes and paralysis. The train kept moving. Sarin still on the floor. Kenichi Hiros rode the Marunouchi line from Ikebukuro. He punctured the bags and left. Passengers collapsed by Nakano Sakawe. A station worker found the punctured bundle, removed it. Still, the train kept going. It reached the end of the line, then turned around, with a new set of passengers. They had no idea. Calls overwhelmed Tokyo's emergency lines. People were gasping for air on platforms, foaming at the mouth, losing vision, dying. Paramedics didn't know what they were dealing with. Some rushed in without gear. They inhaled the gas and collapsed too. Train cars filled with the sound of choking. Station staff used bare hands to carry the leaking bags to trash bins. They died hours later. One man vomited on the tracks. His skin turned purple. He was gone before help arrived. By 9 a.m., most of the trains had been stopped, but the damage was done. 13 people were dead. More than 6,000 were injured. Dozens would live with permanent nerve damage, PTSD, blindness, and for hours no one understood what had happened. It didn't look like an attack. There were no bombs, no explosions, no noise, just trains, and gas, and death. But Sarin has fingerprints. Once identified, it pointed in one direction. Aum Shinrikyo. Within hours, the police had names. Within days, they had warrants. But for Tokyo, and for Japan, it was already too late. A war had been fought under their feet, and most never even knew it began. In the hours after the attack, Tokyo stood still. Trains stopped. Schools closed. Office towers emptied. The air felt poisonous, because it had been. And now, everyone was asking the same question. Why? Why would a religious group gas thousands of innocent people? Why would educated men and women build weapons for a profit? Why didn't anyone stop them sooner? Answers came quickly, but they only made the truth harder to swallow. On March 22, 1995, 2 days after the attack, Japanese authorities raided Aum's compounds. What they found was a state within a state. Dozens of laboratories, chemicals, engineering equipment, prison cells, disguised cremation chambers, hidden documents. Beneath a prayer hall, they found Sarin production equipment, still warm. In one compound, there was a sealed room with a metal bed frame, chains, and blood on the walls. It was never a temple. It was always a factory for murder. Key leaders were arrested. Others fled underground. Some died by suicide. Hideo Murai, the mastermind of Aum's weapons program, was stabbed to death by a Yakuza member on live television. The cult was unraveling in public, piece by horrifying piece. And at the center of it all was Shoko Asahara. They found him weeks later, hiding inside a secret wall compartment covered in urine. His beard was matted, his eyes unfocused. The Messiah had fallen silent. Asahara stood trial for 13 crimes: murder, kidnapping, chemical attacks. The charges were overwhelming, but his silence continued. He rarely spoke. When he did, it was incoherent, mumbling about dimensions and destiny. His followers watched from behind bars as their prophet faded into madness. One by one, they were sentenced. 13 senior members received the death penalty. So did Asahara. They were executed in 2018, but even justice couldn't erase the damage. Thousands were injured. Hundreds still carry scars, physical and psychological. Victims now live with partial blindness, shattered nerves, memories of choking in sealed train cars, waiting to die. Some survivors still suffer from flashbacks when boarding subways. The city healed, but not entirely. And then there were the questions that never went away. How did this happen? Aum had been under surveillance for years. They were known to be dangerous, linked to disappearances, linked to weapons. Yet, they were protected, because Aum wasn't just a cult. It was a legally recognized religion. The Japanese government had granted them official status in 1989, which meant tax breaks, freedom from investigation, and a layer of legitimacy they weaponized. By the time the laws caught up, it was too late. Shoko Asahara wasn't a genius. He wasn't even a good liar. He was a failed businessman, a manipulator who dressed his paranoia in prophecy, but he understood something powerful: loneliness. He found the isolated, the overworked, the brilliant who didn't feel seen, the minds trained to obey, never to question, and he offered them meaning, not hope, not peace, just meaning. That's what built the cult, not religion, not madness, structure, certainty, purpose, wrapped in robes, whispered in mantras, carved into laboratories full of gas. The Tokyo subway sarin attack didn't begin with chemicals. It began with silence, and it ended with it too.